Hi, I'm Andrew Lincoln, aka Ricky Dicky Doodog Rhymes.
Now, I'm not a frequent player of DBD, hence why the gameplay in the background is buns. I'm absolutely awful in a chase, I don't really know how to build craft, and I don't know any cool techs. However, I know this for certain. Patch 9.1.0 just completely broke the game, and I mean it in a literal sense, not some perks were stupidly strong in this patch. I mean, some things were quite literally broken. I don't know how a lot of these things slipped through the cracks because it was stuff that wasn't exactly hard to miss. I mean, just look at Jim. How does that get past playtesters? I feel like the devs just didn't do anything in terms of quality control because there wasn't anything of quality in this update. Sure, Michonne and Rick were cool additions, but I'm not being blinded by that when there were a bunch more problems with the game than there were cool additions. Let's start by talking about perks and items and all of that stuff because they literally broke the game. If you didn't know, there was a really weird bug with Streetwise where if you dropped a toolbox and picked it up over and over again, the charges in the toolbox would multiply. You could do this as many times as you want, building your way up to millions upon millions of charges in a singular toolbox if you really wanted to. Should you do this? No, because it's bannable as you're taking advantage of an exploit. Was it funny? Yes, because you were building an infinite toolbox. How this perk hadn't been disabled hours after the bug was found, but instead a few hours before it was completely patched out, whilst the Gideon's offering had been, because from my understanding it was crashing people's games, is baffling. They'll immediately disable an offering that causes crashes, sure, but not a perk that breaks toolboxes and makes it so that survivors have a much better chance of, well, surviving. Originally, they said that the bug wasn't deserving of a kill switch because it wasn't that big of a deal. Hey, it was their words, not mine. But they've since gone back on that and are now changing their kill switch criteria. But this is behavior, so God knows how long that will take. You might be thinking, oh, that's fine, just report people that abuse that bug, but the bugs got worse when it comes to general gameplay, audio, and cosmetics. The biggest bug affecting the gameplay at release of the update was the fact that sometimes chases straight up didn't trigger, meaning killers and perks that were dependent on bloodlust ended up being useless and could cost the entire game. There was no point of playing melee-focused killers because it was near impossible to catch up with survivors, especially if they're running perks like Lithe and Sprint Burst. Plus, since chases weren't triggering, it allowed survivors to infinitely vault windows and pallets because the entity wasn't being summoned to block vaults after they've been vaulted 3 times in a chase. Chase wasn't triggering, so the entity was just completely absent because it didn't realize that we were in a chase, making Shaq an absolute nightmare against good survivors who know how to loop well. Another downside to this is that since chases weren't triggering, players of both the survivor and killer role weren't getting progress in their respective categories, causing them to lose out on pips. If you play DBD, then you know how important pips are. The higher your survivor/killer rank, the more blood points you get at the monthly reset on the 13th. But since chases weren't triggering, it made it harder to pip, meaning we as players could have missed out on a huge chunk of blood points if this wasn't fixed sooner. The thing is, we knew what was causing this to happen. It's the new fog vials. How do we know that it was the fog vials causing this to happen? Because this isn't the first time that the fog vials had caused this to happen. It's actually the 4th time. It's just they weren't called fog vials at the time, they were called void crystals. It's embarrassing. And I think that one word sums up the entire Walking Dead update. Embarrassing. The player count of the game had a pretty big uptick with the release of the FNAF chapter for very obvious reasons. You know, people have been asking for FNAF to be added to Dead by Daylight for years, and it was supposed to be the turning point of the game. But now we're back to absolute dog shit patches that completely break the game and make it such a slug for everyone to play. No one, and I mean no one, is having fun with this patch because it's legitimately broken. Not in the sense of, haha, that perk is so strong, it's broken, but because it does not work at all. The perks and items were just the starting point of everyone's frustration, but it gets so much worse. Enter The Walking Dead, a franchise everybody and their mother is familiar with. The cosmetics themselves are pretty cool, with Michonne looking straight out of the show, and we get some neat interactions between characters like Daryl and Rick when they're on gens together.
How's it coming along?
thing's garbage. They're run.
But outside of these voice lines, we have half-baked pile of slop. The injured and hooked voice lines were awful and sounded nothing like the voice actors of any of the characters, which was leading players to believe that they were placeholder voice lines and that the team forgot to add the actual intended voice lines, which is the case. It's just kinda strange having these voice lines rather than having Norman Reedus and Andrew Lincoln do the screams and grunts and whatnot. This might be because they're under a contract that says they're not allowed to do these because, you know, preserving their voice. But if that's the case, just don't hire them in the first place. Also, on the roadmap, there was no mention of a map, but we got one. Kind of, not really. It's just a singular tile on the Withered Isle, which I'll admit is a really nice touch, but the devs don't know what the fuck to call it. Is it a map? Is it an area expansion? They cannot make up their minds. There is no specific queue for this quote-unquote map either, even though they specifically said that every new map is going to get a dedicated queue so you can check out that map without having to gamble on an offering. They have officially fucked up one of the biggest licenses in the game. Good job, Behavior. Now, only a week after 9.1.0 came out, we're getting 9.1.1 because of how catastrophic the last patch was. At the time of recording, I haven't played the new patch, so I'm not sure if these problems have been completely fixed. I'll let editing me follow up on this. The problem is, the damage is already done. You get what was arguably one of the biggest licenses in the world at one point, you know, a real household name when it comes to the horror franchises, and you essentially diarrhea out this mound of shit. I honestly expected nothing less. This isn't the first, and it definitely won't be the last time Behavior absolutely fuck this game because they just can't stop doing it. It's honestly laughable.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!